Hey, we talked about X-Men. Now let's talk about my favorite mutants. Let's talk about the turtles I got this month, which was a huge pile. The first is Turtles Usagi Jimbo. This crossover wraps up at 5. It's, you know, wraps up nicely, does okay. I'm realizing more that I'm reading it now how little I was kind of accessing it because this really is a Usagi story where the turtles jump in. And I have just started reading Usagi proper. I am not very far in and starting to see a little bit more already. And so it should be fun to come back to this sort of thing after I've familiarize myself more with the Usagi line, so that'll be more of a fun read. Um, the next is The Last Ronin Continues, this Last Ronin Lost Day special. This is my favorite of the Lost Ronin books so far, which is kind of funny. It's this quiet time with all the side turtles, and we get to see more of their personality come through, and we get more of the future idea of the turtles after the events of the Lost Day. This whole book takes place past, whereas the the last Ronin Lost Day books have been kind of between right before the Lost Ronin, building up to the events of the main book, and then after. This one has been just moving forward, and I'm really enjoying that. Um, we can see aspects of all the other turtles in these newer turtles. There's so they're here, and you can see there's Uno, Moha, Odin, and Yi. Uno's very obsessed with being physical, kind of like a Leonardo character in some ways, but more brash. And these are not quite teenagers yet, but they do feel more like 12, 13, which isn't something we ever really get with the main turtles. So that's been kind of an interesting divergence. Um, we have Moha, who is, I'd say, more of the Donatello like character, but still young and inquisitive. I don't know. That's probably the most direct parallel. There's Odin, who seems to have like a good heart, obsessed with food, seems to kind of be the Mikey character, but is a bigger character and also seems, I don't want to say mentally addled. And you could almost point to being a parallel to like maybe a kind of a special needs kind of character in a way. It's an interesting play, but clearly the way that they're playing it from this, because in the last run they established that as Mikey got older than his brothers was allowed to, he got a lot stronger, and the mutagen took over and really like pushed him forward. So the mutagen is kind of tied to like a higher evolution, and it seems like with Odin, he's there, but the mutagen isn't quite there. So there would be that like direct thing, but there's ways you can actually play that character forward in a compelling way because the character's there, but I don't know, written in a very compelling way. And then Yi seems to have a bit more wrath, a bit more uh, the anger side, I guess. But they're not one to one though, and they are quickly becoming their own characters. And keep in mind, I mean, really across all the Lost Ronin stuff, they've really only had this issue and a handful of pages to shine on their own. And this day is about them going out when they're not supposed to outside of the city, seeing the larger city, and just having a day where they appreciate the world. And I think that's something that's underrated at this point because we don't see it in a lot of media where there are these days where you connect with people and do things, and there's some smaller stake stories. I know I've been banging on about that, but in that quiet time, which I've also been banging about, and like here it is, and it's done super well, and it gives the characters motivation and reason to fight for, to do more for stuff on the other end. It was really refreshing, and honestly, to take something where not a lot of action happens, not a lot of fighting happens, and make it compelling is not necessarily an easy thing to write. And it really does come through here. So, I mean, that is no small thing. Next, I want to talk about two books simultaneously because it's kind of odd. There is Ninja Turtles Street Fighter and then Ninja Turtles Stranger Things. Now, I play Street Fighter regularly, and they currently have a Ninja Turtles crossover. I bought myself a Donatello costume, woohoo. Um, and then there's Stranger Things. I've never seen Stranger Things. I don't know anything about it. But what's telling here is like in this book, the turtles are the turtles, but then the Street Fighter characters are they are the Street Fighter character, sure, but they're just kind of in a tournament together. Nobody's really questioning anything about each other. They're just in their circumstances and they're not questioning, which is fine usually for a comic book crossover. Explaining those kinds of things and doing any meta narrative is usually really painful. And just glazing past is usually the best way to get into it. We see that with the Marvel DC stuff, like the Superman Fantastic Four crossover is really good. The Spider Man Superman crossover is really good because they do kind of glaze past that thing. Whereas ones that are more like the Marvel DC verses, where they talk about the meta narrative and the whole idea of them being in their twisted world and then amalgam and whatnot, and that is the crux of the story, is kind of lame. And here they're fighting in a tournament, but they were fighting in rings and whatnot. I thought they were in like a a fighting ring area or like kind of like a boxing ring setup or more like a martial arts tournament where there are various stages to go and then people will be called to certain ones and other ones will be queuing up, um, which is usually just an entire floor dedicated to that. It turns out, though, because they were in what looked to be that kind of a setting, and then all of a sudden it turns out they were fighting at one floor, and the casino was right there, and people weren't questioning people throwing fireballs and these mutant turtles being around or whatever. And it was just this jarring realization that like, oh, the setting wasn't there and now it is, and this is what it is. It was just this whole like revelation of what's going on in the world they're sitting in, and it just kind of happened accidentally because this is a poor attempt. I mean, this comic is a cash grab, really. Whereas the Stranger Things one, I didn't know anything about the Stranger Things kids. Now I do a bit. And they're really playing into the fact that this is set in the 80s. So the turtles are drawn like the Mirage Turtles. And the special abilities of the kids mean that in order to tackle this amalgamation of the monsters that the Stranger Things is about and kind of the Mousers and Baxter Stockman inventions that are is what's intersecting with what the turtles are dealing with. Um, they kind of split their teams to go tackle it, and then Splinter gives some like sage advice to it and sends them on their way. And it just fits very well, and the art is just like this idea of the turtles, like they do kind of look like monsters, and how are you going to handle that? And I don't know, as far as like crossover ideas, and I was really trepidatious to get this because a lot of these crossovers are kind of corny. This is pretty strong if you're willing to go along for the ride. So pleasantly surprised there. Um, Next up, those playing the home game will know this came in late for me, but it did. Have it now. Read it. Armageddon game number 8, wrapping up the Armageddon game. Uh, Kind of a symptom of everything I've been saying about this event. This book is rushed. I could definitely feel the artist. You could tell some of the artist was drawing pages, but kind of saved the bigger fights for last, and they were rushed and something. Because some of the bigger fight pages for the squirreliest. Um, I don't know. They just kind of rushed through a bunch of ideas and whatnot. It really sucked because the beginning of this moved so slow, and the last I was like, how are they going to do this all? And they literally have their big explosion to wrap up the big action, and then like cut to a day later, Raphael talking to Old Hob and just kind of like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and this happened. I'm like, that should have been an issue. That would have been wind down and allowed them to layer in some other things and make it more digestible, not only to wind down from this gigantic thing, but also then to move into the next section and what ultimately would have been the last issue I read, actually, which is frustrating that I got it out of order, but it is what it is. And then the next issue that I had, but actually, there's something really interesting that came, which is this year's annual, which is TMT Out of Time. Now, I know this is an annual, but it kind of just feels like a one shot shoved in after the Armageddon game, and then the current series is going. And supposedly this takes place right after the Armageddon game, but before the new arc is starting up. And really, this feels like they really could have expanded this story. This is an annual, so it's bigger, but this easily could have been two, maybe three issues. And I think it's a strong enough story that I wish it was given more time after everything it's saying about Armageddon. Here we are, and it's the opposite. Um, the idea here is that there's a raft from an Armageddon. I'm going to just spoil the hell out of this one, uh, because the details are what make this strong. But the idea is there's a Raphael from the future. Donatello created something that blows up existence basically, but in the process of it, zapped Raphael back to the past. Obviously, Raphael can't really explain the science of it, but he just knows he needs to kill Donnie before this happens. But encountering his brothers again and whatnot, and knowing it, Donatello's like, I promise I won't, right? And Raph just can't when he gets the echoes of Splinter talking to him, being back at home, and all of his brothers there just like afraid of him and all. It's a really powerful story. And I mean, there's so many dystopians and like future back to the past. It's a trope at this point within comics, right? It's the Days of Future Past trope. Um, but this takes the Mayu of the Ninja Turtles with that and makes it stronger. And honestly, if they gave it a little time to breathe, I honestly think it could have been considered in the same breath as Days of Future Past. Like, it really is that good. So, I highly recommend that one. Um, then we're back on track with regular Turtles 141. There's a lot in here about Raph getting bailed out of prison by Jenica, and it's really cool to see those two have some straight interaction. And there's some other stuff here with Mikey that reminds me of the Image Run. And we're kind of building to a few things that was played up right before the Armageddon game with Venus and the doctor who was putting her together, and a couple of the other elements. And I'm really kind of excited to see the next issue because we had a fight in this one and we have some intrigue for the next one. And whereas Sophie Campbell is kind of back on the reins, which was a little, I don't know, worrying after the whole Mutant Town slowdown, which is after digging into more of the turtle community. I mean, and frankly, really obviously considered the weakest point of the series through at this point because it was just so long with nothing particular of interest really happening. Um, Stuff's happening now. I'm really excited to see the next issue. Do I expect it to be as explosive and incredible as whatever? No, but I don't care right now. We kind of have had all this stuff, and now we need to set some stones, rebuild, and build to the next big story, and hopefully it's done in due time. So, I mean, by and large, really still liking the Turtles books, and it's kind of a shame because with all these books coming out, and through this process, the news about IDW has come out that they hit hard times. They had to cut staff. They're doing all this, and it sucks. I don't follow a lot of the other IDW books, but I've heard good things about certainly a handful of them, and certainly Turtles is one of their strongest things going. They also have a Rocketeer mini going that I've heard good things about. I just plan on I'm waiting for the trade on that one. Um yeah, I just hope IDW is able to stay afloat for a good long time, though I do wonder if IDW ends up folding sooner than later, which again would suck, but is very much a possibility at this point. Uh, does this Turtles run continue? If so, it would be interesting because the Turtles has been at a number of publishers and companies through the years, often simultaneously. Uh, but now they've been at IDW in one way. And the idea that they would continue this run would be interesting because it would be the first time the Turtles have done that from a publisher to another publisher. Um, Maybe it's not actually that interesting. It would be a little trivia, I guess. Um, in some ways, though, I hope that if they do if the writing's on the wall, maybe they take the time and wrap this up and then let the Turtles restart wherever they go next, hopefully after a breath, because I wouldn't want to start fresh with the Turtles with some of the stories they inevitably have to tell the month after, something like this. So, I mean, after this run, this has been my favorite comic really for like a decade now. A lot of emotional attachment there. So I don't know. Keep reading and hope you like your turtles.